The two titans of the comic book industry are compared and contrasted countless times, and they've absolutely borrowed ideas from one another, whether as a joke or to make a seriously good character.
I've already given you guys a part 1, which you should definitely check out, but today we're teaming up for a part 2 of the top 10 Marvel knockoffs of DC characters.
Do you have a favorite comic character story arc that was taken directly from another comic book character? Well, let us know in the comments down below while we jump right in. Coming in at number 10 is Professor X. Amanda talked in the first video about how the X-Men were a potential knockoff of the Doom Patrol with the whole use of the Marvel method. But given that information, I'm gonna hone in on one character in particular who makes it even more of a knockoff from DC. The parallels between specific characters of the Doom Patrol and the X-Men is never more blatant than with Professor X and Niles Caulder, who appeared within just 1 month of one another, July and June of 1963 respectively. Two paraplegic wheelchair-riding individuals who use not only their large amounts of money, but also their incredible minds to create, run, and lead superhero teams composed of outcasts and vagabonds. Neither one of them really engages in the actual fights, at least very rarely do they ever, and they are both fairly shady people. The main differences come in the form of abilities. Xavier is a telepath, and an incredibly capable one at that, whereas Niles is just really intelligent. Also, Niles is a ginger and Xavier is bald, so they both suffer in the hair department. Kidding, gingers are cool. Gingers are cool.
Number 9, Thor. I mean, this is kind of a funny one to have on here since Thor is actually a knockoff on both sides, as he originated first, of course, in Norse mythology, so who's really to say who ripped off who? And because he is from myth and religion, he is therefore a character that is not owned by anyone in particular, which is why we can have so many Thors in the world. So of course both sides had their own interpretation of this hero. However, the fact of the matter is that DC actually got there first, even though throughout the years Marvel's version of Thor has definitely become way more popular. So when you think of Thor, the superhero, you usually think of Marvel before you think of DC. If you even think of the DC version at all. That's not a snub, it's a fact. The DC version is generally depicted as being a lot more dim-witted than his Marvel counterpart, that is definitely for sure. A lot more of a brute, which means that sometimes he isn't quite as clean-cut heroic as the Marvel version is. But some also believe the DC version to be a lot more true to the actual Thor of Norse mythology, so that's a point for him.
Number 8, Doctor Strange. Both DC and Marvel have threats that come in the form of mystical, magical villains, demons, and monsters that the regular old boring superheroes just aren't equipped to fight. Because of that, in both DC and Marvel comics, Earth is protected mainly by one dude who calls himself Doctor and has a fancy schmancy cape. But one of them came first, and sorry Doctor Strange fans, it wasn't him. DC's Dr. Fate first appeared all the way back in 1940. While Kent Nelson has some magical ability, his main source of power, which is the case for all those who become Dr. Fate, is the Helmet of Fate, which contains the spirit of a cosmic entity called Naboo. Naboo essentially acts through whoever is wearing the helmet, but for Doctor Strange, who debuted in 1963, he does all by his lonesome. Strange trained and learned and became the Sorcerer Supreme all of his own volition, and while he does source magical energies from powerful entities like the Vishanti, he got to where he got all on his own. Does that make him better? That's for you to decide. But it won't change the fact that he is a bit of a knockoff of another magic-wielding sorcerer from DC Comics.
Number 7, Moon Knight. Many people have made the comparison between Moon Knight and Batman before, and although when you really dive into the character of Moon Knight, I do feel like the two are really different, from a surface level perspective, I can see why. Moon Knight, I would even say, has given me some straight up Azrael vibes before, and Azrael is literally both a wannabe Batman and like an actual version of Batman at one point, so. Moon Knight is a superhero who sometimes is seen as not even being superpowered per se, but more of like an agent of justice who simply works really hard at his skills and acts as an agent of Khonshu, the Egyptian god of the moon. This is where the two characters really diverge with that whole kind of Egyptian god thing, but it's also implied through his missions that Moon Knight's god may perhaps not exist at all. Depending on the story you are reading, Mark Spector's god can either be interpreted as either another persona residing within him as a result of his dissociative identity disorder, or as a real supernatural force that guides, protects, helps, and sometimes even imbues Mark with power. Add in the fact that Mark Spector has another persona known as Stephen Grant, who is known for being a millionaire with his own butler, and who helps to outfit Moon Knight and his other detective persona Mr. Knight on their missions, and yeah, I mean, I see it, I get it. Also, Batman dresses all in black and Moon Knight dresses all in white, which, while a completely different vibe, different shades, does feel like an homage to the Dark Detective.
Number 6. Vision. In August of 1968, a mad supervillain creates an incredibly powerful super android who has a cool cape with an extremely large collar in order to destroy a group of superheroes, but because of comic books, the android becomes self-aware and thankfully good, and instead joins the superhero team. Am I talking about the Vision? Or am I talking about Red Tornado? It's a mystery. If we ignore the fact that the Vision was first introduced as an alien even before this, which I am, and we ignore the differences of intangibility and Red Tornado's wind powers, then it's very obvious that one of these characters are borrowing from another. And because of the title of this video, and to create drama in the comments below, I'm gonna say it's Vision. This is gonna be spicy. Ha.
Number 5. Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was and has been quite the hot button issue ever since, well, any other character who could be compared to Superman existed. The interesting thing about this one is that the initial controversy was between not even Marvel and DC, but DC and Fawcett, where DC had felt that Fawcett's Captain Marvel was a blatant ripoff of their character. DC even at one point sued Fawcett and almost won that lawsuit. In fact, they did manage to prove that Captain Marvel was indeed a copy of their Superman, but what they failed to prove, and what lost them this case, was that Superman was theirs and theirs alone. Now that had to do with an error DC made in terms of making sure that each Superman comic had the proper copyright symbol attached. Ugh, that must have been embarrassing. As a result, they lost the case, but would eventually come to own Captain Marvel anyways. Then there was the issue of who should get to use that name, DC or Marvel? Marvel won that legal dispute, but the fact remains that their Captain Marvel first appeared in the 60s, while DC's, originally from Fawcett of course, appeared with his original publisher way back in the 1940s.
Number 4. Hawkeye. Hey look! A superhero who isn't actually super at all, who wields a bow as his main shtick, doing cool tricks and flips, and keeping up with the biggest team in their universe full of extremely powerful super beings and having shaky love lives. It's Green Arrow! Hawkeye! Sorry. How could I get them mixed up? Silly me. Now, there are inherent differences between these two characters that do set them apart from one another. For starters, Green Arrow is a bit more like Batman, being a billionaire, and he's incredibly extroverted, sarcastic, and opinionated, whereas Hawkeye is more like the everyman, a modest man who initially used his dark mercenary past to start off as a villain and eventually become a hero. Also, Hawkeye wears purple, where Green Arrow wears green. Now, it may not be entirely a fact that Hawkeye is ripped off from Green Arrow, but he did appear after the bow-wielding DC character, with Clinton Barton debuting in 1964 and Oliver Queen debuting in July 1958. Also, Clinton as a first name is odd. Sorry to my Clintons out there, but it's sorry.
Number 3. Squadron Supreme. Squadron Supreme is intended to be a knockoff, or, well, a commentary. But in doing so, you become a knockoff, so this one shouldn't even be that triggering for me to claim. Although, let's be real, us comic book fans, we're pretty easily triggered by things, so I'm sure someone out there, amidst the, big Squadron Supreme fans, are there a lot of them? I don't know, might still be offended by me stating this. Even though it was intentional, it seems, on Marvel's part, and is pretty blatantly obvious. But hey, if you want to be offended, that's your prerogative. They don't try to hide this. It's all sort of part of a commentary on how DC's Justice League stack up to Marvel's own premier roster. So Squadron Supreme are kind of like a stand-in for them, so that Marvel can be like, look, see, we're great, Avengers, woo! Hence why the Squadron Supreme and the Avengers so often have clashed in the comics. The Squadron Supreme of Earth 712, there have been a few iterations of this team, first appeared back in the 1970s in Avengers issue number 85, and definitely resembled DC's Justice League, with each character on the team seemingly filling in for a specific hero on the JL roster. In comparison, the Justice League first formed in the 1960s in Brave and the Bold issue number 28, so yeah.
And at number 2, Thanos. It's almost obvious. In fact, it is obvious, and according to the creator of Thanos, Jim Starlin, the physical similarities between the most threatening alien warlords in DC and Marvel Comics is intentional. It is well known that during the development of Thanos as a character, Marvel took clear inspiration from Darkseid. And why wouldn't they? Both Thanos and Darkseid come into comics seeking out MacGuffins that will give them unrivaled power in their respective universes. The Infinity Gauntlet, which would allow Thanos to spread death over the cosmos to impress the love of his life, Lady Death, and the anti-life equation which would give Darkseid control over all life. But the characters obviously have some clear differences, which have mainly come over time with the progression of their characters, where Darkseid is just an evil conqueror, Thanos is a bit more of a complex character whose goals are strictly personal. What I think would be interesting is if these two fought. It has happened before, but there was never a clear-cut winner. I like Thanos more, but I do think Darkseid would whoop the purple-chinned Mad Titan. What do you guys think?
Number 1. Whizzer. Whizzer is a character who has been many different people throughout the years, but mainly we're talking about the character's first incarnation here, since it was so close to another character from DC who came into existence and was quite similar. Yep, you may have guessed it just from taking a look at the Whizzer. We are indeed talking about DC's Flash. Flash made his first appearance in Flash issue number 1 in 1940. Like Whizzer, there have been many iterations of the Flash as well. The version of the character we are talking about here is the Flash Jay Garrick. The Whizzer, on the other hand, made his first appearance shortly after, appearing in August of 1941 in Marvel's USA Comics issue number 1, just over a year and a half after the Flash appeared on the comic scene. The original Whizzer that appeared was Robert Frank, and he not only boasted of similar powers to the Flash, possessing an intense super speed known as hyperspeed and a body that could exist and thrive at high speeds, but he even had a similar look, with his costume also possessing little wings on both sides of the hood of his outfit. It's pretty, I mean, Jay Garrick's wings, you know. That's all the time we have for Knockoffs today.
We hope you enjoyed this little stroll down comic history lane.
Stay nerdy, YouTube.
And we'll see you on the next one, nerds. Peace!